Welcome to our series of healthcare scene interviews where we sit down with top leaders in healthcare IT. I'm John Lynn, the founder of healthcarescene.com, a leading network of healthcare IT resources. I'm happy to host one of my favorite interviews of all healthcare IT. I do it with her regularly, and I'm happy to have her here with me today. But before I introduce our special guest, I want to remind those watching live that we'll talk for about 30-40 minutes in kind of a interview style format, and then we'll open it up for others. If you have any questions you want for our guest or for myself, we certainly welcome you to hop on what we call the after party. You can hop on and either ask questions, share insights of your own. You're certainly welcome to participate. Also, if you're watching live, there's a couple features you might want to know about the blab. First, if you like what someone's saying, or maybe if you just like the person in general, you can click on their face and give them what they call props. Those are always interesting and exciting to get. Also, if on the left side, there's a button to tweet and post to Facebook. If you want to share that with your followers and share that we're doing this live interview, please do so. Much appreciated. Finally, if you have any questions during the chat or even during the after party, you can put /Q space and then add a question, and that will get queued up in Blab, and we'll try to respond to it during the interview if we have time and it works in the flow of what we're talking about. Otherwise, we'll save it for the after party and certainly answer those questions there. So without further ado, we're on to the fun. So I want to welcome Dana Sellers. She's the CEO of Encore, a Quintiles Company, which I think I always slaughter Quintiles. Did I say it right this time, Dana?
You said it perfect.
Woo, finally. It's only taken 2 years since you were acquired by Quintiles, so I'm finally there. Welcome, Dana. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, John.
So before we begin, Dana, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you have a long history in healthcare IT. Maybe give us the Cliff Notes version of your experience in healthcare IT and what you're really about.
Well, it's sort of funny. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I stumbled into healthcare by accident a long time ago. Got into doing software for hospitals years ago and moved from there into healthcare IT consulting. Wow. Been doing that for a long, long time, and have seen a whole lot of changes in the industry, and it's interesting I think we're at a really exciting point in history right now. Yeah. It'll be interesting where we go next.
Indeed. In fact, that's one I think why it's so great to interview you is you have such a depth of experience both in the past, but also, moving things forward. And so, that's always impressed me, your experience. And you've seen the healthcare IT shifts over the years. So let's start off maybe this discussion by talking about where are we now in these cycles of healthcare IT and what do you see happening?
It's funny when you talk about this depth of experience. I think what you really mean is old. But
I wouldn't say that, but I guess that is a feature of experience.
But it's interesting. When I was beginning my consulting career, we worked with a very progressive hospital to help them develop a vision for electronic medical records. We didn't even know that word back then. No one had coined that term back then. But we came up with this vision for this integrated set of clinical data. Recently, my daughter-in-law had a baby at that hospital. And I had the opportunity to sit and watch as the nurses came in and interacted with her and the baby. And they used handheld devices to capture vital signs and nurses' notes, and it was amazing to see how the industry has changed over time. I think we're at this really interesting point in time where I've always described it as sort of these two mountain peaks. We've been on this big journey over this one mountain peak, which is EHR deployment, and we're kind of on the tail end of that mountain peak. Everybody keeps predicting it's almost done. It's almost over. And it's really, there continues to be a lot of activity on that mountain peak. I saw one report recently that said 1,100 to 1,400 hospitals are going to make an EHR decision over the next 3 years.
Ooh.
That's amazing. There's still a lot of life left in that first mountain peak.
Wow.
But picture, if you will, that there's a second mountain peak that we're just starting up. And that mountain peak is this whole idea of population health management. And it's probably even bigger than this peak that we've been experiencing for the past 20 years. One report, I think it was a Goldman Sachs report, predicts that by 2020, the whole market for population health management and dealing with at-risk populations will be a $45 billion market. There's going to be a lot of activity around how do we use this investment in electronic health records now to go drive value and really manage populations to be healthier. That's the time we live in. Now, this transition from one mountain peak to the other is sort of an interesting time. It's going to be hard to make that transition. And, I've been predicting that transition would happen sooner. I think we're seeing the first mountain peak drag out a little bit longer and the second mountain peak delay a little bit longer. But there's no doubt it's happening.
Wow. Such an incredible analogy. And I'm a pretty avid hiker, so I think the example of a peak is really interesting because, if you've ever hiked, that feeling of you're like, geez, I'm almost there. And then you get to the top of the peak and you realize, oh, no, there's 4 more peaks ahead of me. And I think that's true with EHR, right? We reach the top of the EHR peak and then we realize, oh, wait. We haven't done the data stuff. We haven't done the population health stuff. We haven't done the precision medicine stuff. There's all these other peaks just waiting. Wow, very interesting.
All we've done is lay the foundation so that we can go do the important stuff.
Wow. And your analogy is actually perfect, too, because you said, I thought we'd get to the second peak, right, population health in your case, right, as you were describing it. I thought we'd get there sooner, which is the same as hiking, right? You look at these peaks and you're like, geez, those look really close. Why don't we just hike to that one? And so then you start hiking, you're like, wait, my vision from the first peak was skewed and thought it was much easier to get there than I thought, but it ends up taking a lot longer. Wow, what a great analogy. That is perfect. So interestingly enough, I guess the first peak too. One of the cornerstones of the first peak, and really what motivated many people to scale that peak, is meaningful use. So meaningful use was a huge part of that peak, or at least it was the funding to get you to the top of the peak. Well, we hear word from CMS that it's going to be replaced. What are your thoughts about what replacement means, and how is that going to play out from your view?
Well, when Andy Slavitt made that announcement at JP Morgan conference, it got all these big headlines. MU to be replaced, meaningful use is dead, going away.
Yeah.
But really, that's the plan all along. CMS has been telling us that their plan is to harmonize all these programs. And if you look at the legislation for MACRA and MIPS last fall, they were very clearly beginning that transition back then for physicians. We're expecting the rules to come out maybe next month even that will help us understand how that's to be implemented. But that big announcement wasn't any big news. That was just an expected part of the transition to harmonization. And it doesn't mean that we can, that we're done with measures. In fact, measures are going to play an even more important part. Electronic measures are going to play an even more important part of what's going on. We can say meaningful use is going away, but it's just morphing into a whole lot more measures. We can expect those measures to be focused on quality very heavily. So think how to get your data ready for discrete quality measures and a whole variety of programs that are going to ask for those for those electronic measures.
I think that's good advice, right? Is how do you get your data in order to be able to handle the quality measures? I think the reporters, a lot of them missed it when they said meaningful use is dead. My report was meaningful use is being replaced, and be careful. Change isn't always better, right? It could be replaced with something even more onerous. So, I think we need to be careful saying, yay, it's done, because if we do it the wrong way, it could be even worse than what we have today. I think we have to be careful for it, right? That said, I think he did say the right things. He understands the emotions of what organizations are experiencing with meaningful use. So I'm hopeful that it will be a reduction in what's required and a focus more on, I'll quote Mark Probst, on quality outcomes as opposed to, did you do this action?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the trend. We're focusing more on measuring outcomes rather than did you do the step.
And then, what if this is a little shift from meaningful use, but if we're measuring quality outcomes, my question has always been, okay, so we'll pay you if you improve your quality outcomes. Well, at some certain point, you've improved as much as you can, right? Like the improvement is just not there to happen. So if we're paying you to improve it, does that mean at some point we stop paying you? And that doesn't, I don't know how that's sustainable over the years, or are there just always more things that you could improve?
Yeah, I think there's always something to improve.
Yeah, I don't know. So we'll see how it plays out.
I have a friend who was CEO of a physician group in California, very innovative guy. And he launched a program where every month he would introduce a new metric to his organization, and he would get the whole organization focused on that metric. And he would tie his physicians' incentive program around it, their reimbursement, their compensation. He would get his IT group to focus on how to report better around those metrics. He would get his nurses focused on how to work with the patients to get them, get better data and get them in compliance. He got the schedulers focused on that metric. And when he'd get that metric kind of, really underway, the next month, boom, there would come another metric. And they were cumulative. They didn't go away. It was every month there was another metric they focused on getting very crisp, very focused on.
Wow.
I think that's the world we live in now. It's not that we can forget anything. Nothing goes away. It's all additive.
Yeah, I've seen the same in a small rural ambulatory practice. Dr. Jen Brule, I think is her name. She's done that, right? She said, let's focus on ensuring compliance with this factor. I think she started with breast cancer screenings, and then she expanded beyond that. And I think that is the world that we live in. So outside of government regulations, which I think, we're all a little bit tired of, I think that we're kind of burnt out, although it's kind of a feature of healthcare. But outside of that, what would be your suggestion to healthcare organizations that really want to get the most out of their investment in EHR? I mean, many have spent millions, some billions, of dollars on this EHR. What would be your suggestion outside of, okay, you got to go do the regulation? What else can they do to really harness that investment?
Well, let me just caution, before I answer your question and say, even though everybody's tired of this regulatory stuff, we can't ignore it. No. We have a group of about 12 folks that meet regularly, and all they do is keep up with regulatory stuff. They track what's going on in Washington, and they understand, new rules, and they interpret what that means to the clients we work with, and their watch list of legislation that contains HIT impact is longer than it has ever been. When you start looking at the MACRA, the MIP stuff, the PAMPA stuff, the Senate Health Bill, all these things have HIT legislation in them. And it's expanding like crazy. I really don't know how small organizations keep up with all this stuff. So, I mean, it's, I would just say we can't we can't ignore the regulatory stuff. It's more than ever. But with that said, what do we do beyond that? One, to get value out of our systems. One thing that's kind of near and dear to my heart that I've been, ever since we started Encore, I believed that one of the things we really have to do to get value out of our systems is to use this data that we have now to drive new insights that can really change healthcare. We've got this massive electronic data now for the first time, so let's do something with it that will really make a difference. Let's use it in analytics to really understand new things about our patients, about how we can improve how we care for them. As I travel around and I talk to healthcare organizations and I say, what are you doing in analytics? I can tell you most organizations today are either doing what they call analytics is really just reporting. They're just busy trying to get reports out of their systems. Or maybe it's sort of kind of point analytics, maybe just drilling into one specific area to get one specific answer. There's very little broad, let's look at a whole disease state, let's look at a whole process. There's very little broad analysis going on across a large segment of patients. And I think that's really the next opportunity to drive significant value is let's start looking at that and understanding how we can improve outcomes, reduce costs, improve efficiency. There's a wealth of data especially in our clinical data, that we can do some amazing things with.
It seems like the new programs, the value-based reimbursement, ACOs, I mean, that what you just described is going to be essential to that, no? I mean, like if they don't build up this capability, I don't think those organizations will survive.
It all plays together. You need the data for the ACOs and the insights you gain. Not every organization is going to be doing original research and stuff, but if you don't understand how your organization cares for patients and where your opportunities are for improvement, what best practices are, you're not going to be able to function as well as you should in a population health management world.
And it's interesting if I were to put myself in the shoes of some of these CIOs and analysts and managers at these hospitals, I'd probably say, well, I'm so busy dealing with all the regulations you talked about that are important that when do I fit in all this extra time to? It's almost like Christopher Columbus trying to explore America, right? Like exploring the data analytics to discover what other things I'm missing. And so, I think most of them would say, I would love to be Christopher Columbus and dive into the data so I can really change things, but I'm so overwhelmed by the operational side of things. When do I do it? So I think you're right. Not everyone's going to do it, and we probably need to create the functions to be able to share insights and discoveries between organizations. Interesting.
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, and we'll see. I'm interested to see who is the organization or who are the people or what's the platform that's going to provide for that information sharing. I think most people in healthcare are pretty generous with their discoveries, but we have to make it easy. Otherwise, they'll just be like, well, I'd be happy to share, but I don't really know how. So I think that's a problem we need to solve. On a related topic, when I look at healthcare IT and EHR and as it's been implemented, many doctors are just burnt out. They're angry. And I think they're angry for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's just technology, but I think EHR is almost kind of the whipping boy for all of their anger and frustration because, many of the regulations and everything end up becoming represented in the EHR. And so they say, oh, I hate the EHR, even though what they really hate is all the regulations that were embedded into the EHR. Anyway, long story short, a lot of it, doctors are angry, and they often say, oh, well, it's all these clicks. I feel like I'm a click monster, like all I do all day is click, click, click. It's impeding my relationship. What needs to be done to like shift that tide so that doctors actually are happy to have healthcare IT, are happy to have an EHR, and don't feel like data entry clerks? Any suggestions there?
I think first of all, it's very real. I've had, and I think it's more real in the ambulatory world than in the hospital, in the acute setting. I've had 2 personal physicians retire rather than deal with EHRs. They've been around a long time, and they just said, "Hey, not doing this." But it's a very real problem, and I think it's got 2 components. I'd say one is that, remember, we implemented a lot of these systems, and the philosophy was, let's just put it in, we'll fix it later, we'll optimize later. Well, later is now. There's a life cycle of when you put a system in, right away you have to fix bugs, then you do a performance release, then you start to deal with some functionality gaps, and finally you get around to things like, well, how many clicks does it take? Well, we're to the point where we have to deal with that level of problem now. We've dealt with all the others. We've got to deal with how many clicks does it take. We've got to optimize that. So some of it is just really going back and looking at, how did we implement? Was there a smarter way to do it? And some of those things can be fixed. But I would contend that some of it is not just an implementation issue. Some of it really has to do with the broader workflow issues. We're asking the doctor to do things that the doctor shouldn't be doing because we have this fragmented environment where we really don't have care coordination and integration of systems across the continuum of care. If we had care coordination across the continuum of care, the physician wouldn't be asked to record everything, about what happened to the patient before they came to him or what, is going to happen afterwards. It would be a more seamless thing, and the physician would only document maybe what happened with that physician. Right now he's being asked to document a lot extra because there's no continuity in the record. So I think that's a big part of the issue.
So you think interoperability of data and having that data available would save them a lot, which is a good point. Roxanne in the comments said, does it depend on the doctor's age? I think to some extent there is some bias, obviously, like you said, some of the older doctors just said, forget it, I'm out. But, and I've heard stories from med students who complain about having to do a rotation at a doctor who has a paper chart because they don't write fast, they type fast. So I think there is some age bias there. But that said, I also know some young doctors who are awful and hate EHR, and I know some older doctors that really do well. So, I don't think it's totally age. Any thoughts on the age question?
Well, I've seen it. I've seen, my personal experience, the older doctors have more trouble adopting and probably complain more. But I think it's also a matter of how you've implemented, and that's a function. Any age can have a bad implementation and can complain about that.
I think that's the biggest problem I've seen. I think it's twofold on this side. One is, how well did you implement it? And then the second is the regulations that are required that, I'm sorry, but there's just no choice. Do you want to get paid? You have to do this, right? And so, between the two, it's given kind of a black eye to the EHR world. And hopefully, the nice thing is the first part we can fix. Like you said, they forced it in and said, we'll fix it later. Well, now it's time to fix it. So
later is now.
that's great. So, let's talk about some of the benefits you're seeing, right? Because, I think one of the interesting things about any software that you implement, and actually I think this is true across a lot of aspects of life, is once you implement something, you achieve all these benefits, and then you immediately start to take them for granted, right? Like, I always use the example in the EHR world that, finding the paper chart is now instant. And we just take that for granted. We forget that, oh yeah, in the paper chart world, I would spend hours, and we had whole HIM staff just devoted to, pulling the charts, right? What are some of the benefits that you're seeing that maybe go beyond that, from having an EHR investment that probably wouldn't even have been possible to consider before we had an EHR?
Well, I think, one of the benefits is the ability to do things like analytics. We're seeing clients organizations being able to take clinical data that they've gathered, maybe originally just for meaningful use, but because they took the effort to get that data in a clean, disciplined manner, now they can use it for all kinds of things. They can actually look at a disease state and understand which parts of their organization are performing well, what their best practices are, whether they get value out of adherence to an order set or not. So that, the ability to do analytics, because we've captured data and we've captured it in a disciplined, clean way, is really important. The other thing is just this ability to even be thinking about population health management and sharing data. We wouldn't have been contemplating the things we're contemplating without the foundation that we have now of an EHR. The ability to coordinate care across a whole community. You couldn't even contemplate that without EHRs in place. It's still hard. What we're seeing right now is interesting. Today, if you go back, here's my benefit of having been around a long time. You go back to right after Y2K. Everybody had been very focused on putting in financial systems for Y2K. And right after Y2K, there was sort of this silence for about 6 months. Everything went dead right in 2000.
They'd all spent their money.
Yeah, they were all tired. They're all like, ah. And then in about June of 2000, we started to see strategy projects spring up. I want a clinical systems strategy. I want an IT strategy. Well, what we're seeing now is we're starting to see strategy projects spring up. I want a strategy for population health management. I want a strategy for my infrastructure for population health management. I need to understand what my strategy is for coordinating care across multiple organizations. Mm-hmm. And it feels like we've kind of taken a breath after meaningful use and after implementation. There's been that little lull, and now we're getting ready to start to figure out what's next. So I think we'll understand. We'll start to understand now. We're asking the questions: how do I go, really get value out of this, and how do I drive something forward?
I think that's a good comparison. I've had the same emotion as I've thought about, like, it feels like meaningful use is played out, even though, there's still plenty of work to do. There's kind of teams dedicated to it and they handle it. And now we can start thinking about what are the other things we can do. And I get that palpable sense in organizations that it's like, okay, let's do something more. So I agree with you completely. There was another interesting example I heard recently about the whole Flint, Michigan water issue that was discovered because a doctor, I don't remember exact details of who the doctor was and where they were, but they discovered in the EHR essentially an outbreak of all these cases where they were having some, I forget what the conditions that were caused because of the bad drinking water. But because of they discovered that, they looked across a bunch of patients and said, wait, oh, we're seeing a bunch of patients with this. Maybe there's something more. And so then they were able to discover that outbreak, which is like, okay, now imagine that in the paper world. It's like she wouldn't have been able to go across all of these paper charts, find the ones that had that specific disease that was breaking out in her community so they could discover that the water was a problem. They would have just said, oh, you probably have something else, right? And they would have, written it off as something that wasn't the reality. And I think, those are the things that are most exciting about EMR, that was just like, you couldn't even consider it in paper charts. And I think your point about reimbursement is good as well, because if we don't have the data in the EHR, we couldn't even talk about value-based reimbursement because we have no idea how you're doing it. It's stuck in a paper somewhere. Interesting.
I think that was a pediatrician that found it, and you're right. It's a great example.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up with kind of a question of what technologies are exciting you most. I mean, we talked about analytics. Are there any other things on the horizon that get you really excited, and kind of maybe related? Are there any that don't? Right? Are there any buzzwords that you have out there and you're like, oh, we need to throw that in the trash bin? That's like. Maybe because it just doesn't have meaning, or maybe because it's overhyped. Any things good and bad that you see on the horizon?
Well, John, you're talking to a consultant here, so we have to take an advanced course in buzzwords before we qualify.
Well, I'm a blogger, so we take those buzzwords to a new level.
I want to just eliminate all buzzwords. I get documents sometimes that from our own people that I can't understand. So I just like to eliminate, words like methodology and deliverables. And if we could just get rid of all of those words, that'd be good. I think, that one buzzword that I'm tired of is big data. It seems like we've been hearing about big data for so long. I think we can move past that one now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just tired of hearing about big data. It seems to me that we just need to focus on what data do we really need and go after it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I will tip my hat to my friends at Gartner.
Okay.
They've taken buzzwords and actually incorporated them into our fabric. The hype cycle, the magic quadrant. What we need some new ones.
Mm-hmm.
I challenge them. Come out, give us something new now.
So my new buzzword. Do you want my new buzzword? I actually coined it last HIMSS, but to me, I think the next purchase that most organizations are going to make, I call it a care management system. If we look at the evolution, we started with financial, which was PM or an HIS in a hospital, right? Where you had the hospital information system, almost exclusively financial. How do we process claims? How do we do all those things, right? And then we implemented the EMR or EHR, I guess, if you prefer. I still am old school. I like EMR. But, and so the EMR was this clinical one, right? So it was, okay, it revolves around the doctor and what does the doctor document or what does the nurses document, right? And so we went financial, then we went clinical. And so is the future, system that every organization is going to purchase focused around the patient? And I call that a care management system, right? So now if we're worried about the patient, do we need a system that is centered around the patient and everything that happens with that patient health data wise? What do you think of that concept?
Well, I like it. It's almost like if you step back, it's almost like we are back a long time ago. We had an environment where we had a lot of niche systems that we were trying to bring together into an integrated EMR or EHR. Now, within the acute setting, in a lot of cases, we've achieved that. If you step back onto a more, a more grand level, we still have a lot of niche systems that we're trying to bring together. And so maybe it's your care management system that needs to bring all of that together.
That's funny you say that. I've seen that same evolution, right? Initially, we had the PM and the EHR, and they needed to be separate, right? Because my PM was good. I'm not buying another system. Are you kidding me? I know my PM, right? Or I know and so it has to be separate. And then there was this movement like, wait, why are they separate? These interfaces between the two are awful. So now I need it integrated. So now it needs to all be integrated. So then we've gone back to integration. And then you start looking forward and you're like, okay, well, now as we head to genomic medicine, right? As we head to, all these other services, population health, care management, engaging the patient, it's like, okay, well, the EHR vendor is not building a genomic medicine solution. So how are they going to do it? Well, they're going to integrate it, right? And so now we're going to have all these integrations with these best of breed systems, and now we're going back to okay, everyone's going to integrate whatever is there. And then I asked the question, does that mean eventually we're going to say, okay, now let's integrate back into one, the companies start combining again? Probably. I think we're going through the cycles of healthcare and technology.
You make me think of something that's kind of interesting. One of the things that I've seen going on right now that I think is interesting is I'm seeing this a number of specialty little niche applications spring up. And they might be things that do nothing but identify patients who are at risk for a return to the ICU, or for a readmission, or I've heard of an interesting system that does patient matching. So we may be entering an era where there's been so much focus on getting my EHR in, but now we've got it in, and we're realizing that there are some gaps. People may be open to filling in some gaps with some little niche, best of breed kind of apps. So it'll be interesting to watch and see if there's a resurgence of little specialty things coming about.
Well, even the government is requiring them to build an API to allow that type of interaction, which we'll see how that plays out. I think that's another story for another day. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting environment. I think it's interesting where we started. You said it's an exciting time for healthcare IT, and I think it is as well, because I think we understand meaningful use, and now we have a baseline of technology. And now I think we're going to start seeing creative solutions that come from unexpected areas that we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why haven't we been doing that forever? And then you're like, well, we were in the paper world. We couldn't think about that. So I think it's a really exciting time. Let people know if they're watching live or on the recorded version, where can they find out more about you, about Encore and the work you're doing there with Quintiles?
Well, they can go to our website, EncoreHealthResources.com. They can certainly come see us. They can find us on LinkedIn or Twitter. They can come see us at HIMSS. We'll be in booth 6651 at HIMSS, and we'll be there from breakfast till after midnight every day. So you can definitely find us there. Or people are welcome just to call me and or email me, and we'll talk.
Excellent. Well, and you didn't promote your famous pub nights. I think, it's interesting you have the booth morning and night, but I think people like your pub nights the most. I know I do. So I'm sure I'll be visiting you at HIMSS at pub nights. Thanks so much for joining me today, Dana. Again, we're here with Dana Sellers, CEO of Encore, a Quintiles Company, and I'm John Lynn, the founder of healthcarescene.com. Thanks for joining live. Stay after for the after party. If you're watching the recorded version, you can find other Healthcare Scene videos at ehrvideos.com and across the whole network of Healthcare Scene websites. Thanks so much, Dana.